So, the channel has now reached over 100,000 subscribers. To celebrate this occasion, I thought it would be a cool idea to go back and remake one of my old videos with the knowledge I've gained over the years. One of the oldest videos on the channel is this Eeloo on SRB's mission, which I made a little over 5 years ago. There is a lot of potential for improvement here, so let's take a second go at it. To make things a bit more challenging this time, I'm gonna do this fully reusable as well. That's right, we're gonna recover everything back to Kerbin. With the challenge set, here's what I came up with. It has a mass of 69.7 tons on the pad, and its first stage is powered by a single S2-17 thoroughbred solid rocket booster. This is substantially smaller than my old design, which had 81 kickback SRBs in the first stage and had a launch mass of over 3,000 tons. To put that in relative terms, the new design is only 2.3% the mass of the original one, which I'd say is a pretty good improvement. Okay, that's enough about the old design, let's get this mission off the ground. I'll explain the design of this as we go along. First and foremost, the biggest challenge of this mission is that we can't throttle solid rocket boosters. As a result, we need to be careful with each burn. For the first stage, it's easy to take a profile too steep because of the high thrust to weight ratio and end up with an apoapsis that's just too high to be efficient. We want to get into a nice low circular Kerbin orbit, so we need to tune our launch profile carefully. To do that, I angled the craft 15 degrees at launch, and then switched the SAS to prograde once we reached a specific velocity. By doing this, we can consistently get a good gravity turn. Since we're taking a shallow profile, and we have a high thrust-to-weight ratio, we're also going to be taking a lot of aerodynamic heating, especially at the end of the burn. That's why I have this sideways heat shield on the front here. KSP applies the most aerodynamic heating to the first part in the airstream, and so this heat shield takes the high heat load instead of the nose cones or fairings, which would explode otherwise. As we leave the atmosphere, we're going to open up the fairing in preparation for our circularization burn. The fairing door here is made of a completely stock mechanism. The nose cone has some RCS thrusters, which are contained inside a housing of thermometers all inside the fairing. You can see how this fits together here. When we want to rotate the door, we can just decouple the nose cone and then rotate the main craft to swing the door open. One last note for this. To keep everything aligned nicely, I made a mechanism with these landing gear in here to lock the door in place before we grab it with the claw and redock it. With the door open, we just need to light up these small SRBs to push ourselves into orbit. I know this backwards setup looks strange, but there is a good reason I'm doing it. With this backwards orientation, we can simply dump the payload out of the fairing once we reach a circular orbit. The SRB is still burning at this point, so we can then flip the main craft around to do its deorbit burn, all with just one stage of SRBs. We'll get to the payload in a moment, but first let's recover the launch vehicle. We're on a suborbital trajectory at this point, so recovering this will be like any other spaceplane. To land at the KSC, we need to control our drag carefully. This craft is fairly lightweight empty, so drag slows it down pretty quickly. With this in mind, we want to keep it pointed prograde to minimize drag for most of the descent, and then flare up to slow down and redirect our trajectory as we get closer. And there's our first stage recovered. Let's head on back to the payload. just looking at this, you'll notice our payload is pretty small. It's only 3.1 tons, which is considerably smaller than my old design, which was about 260 tons in low Kerbin orbit. Now that said, with other propulsion methods such as ion engines, this would be plenty of mass to get to Eeloo and back. But we're using SRBs here, and SRBs are a lot less efficient. There's only about 1.1 kilometers per second of delta V in the transfer stage here, which is not enough to do a direct Eeloo transfer. We need to get some help with this, so we're gonna do some gravity assist to get all the way out to Eeloo. As with any good gravity assist route, Eve will be our first stop. This is also why our inclination is so high. We need this inclination to get a good encounter. I'll talk more about how I figured this out later. But as for right now, we have exactly 1,111 meters per second in this transfer stage. Again, we can't throttle this or shut them down, so we need to be careful about how we spend this. To give us the transfer we want, I played with the timing and components of the maneuver node until I got a burn that gave an encounter while also expending exactly 1,111 meters per second of delta V. You can see that this burn got us pretty close. It was within about 0.5 meters per second of the desired burn. However, if you've done gravity assist before, you know this isn't good enough. 0.5 meters per second can be the difference between getting a gravity assist chain and being completely off. We certainly need to fine-tune this. That's why for mid-course corrections, I've added some separatrons with a small amount of fuel. These burn through about 10 meters per second of delta V each. We need to be extremely precise with these burns. So I calculated how much delta V each sepratron will give us exactly, and then created maneuver nodes accordingly. For example, the first sepratron burns 10.04 meters per second of delta V, and you can see I've created a correction maneuver with 10.04 meters per second of delta V. You can see this gets us very close to our desired periapsis. We are within about 15 kilometers of the planned periapsis, which is good enough to actually get a Kerbin encounter. Of course, it's not quite there, but it can be corrected as we get closer. We're gonna do the rest of the gravity assists like this as well. As we go through this, let's talk about how I planned this gravity assist chain in the first place. So, unlike Hohmann transfers, gravity assists are not trivial to calculate. Due to the complexity of the problem, this is not feasible to calculate by hand, so we need a different method. One way I've used in the past is just basically winging it. I do a burn to reach Eve, then set up an encounter for Kerbin after that, and then so on for the rest of the chain. This works alright for a trip to Joule since everything is mostly in circular orbits and the timing doesn't matter that much. It's a different story for Eeloo though. It's in an inclined and elliptical orbit, which means we need to encounter it at its apoapsis to be efficient. To say the least, taking the trial and error winging it approach would be a very time-consuming task, especially with the limited number of correction burns we have. Fortunately, there is another way. There are gravity assist calculators out there that can help us out with this. In particular, for this chain, I used Aerostar's trajectory optimization tool. This tool can calculate gravity assist chains between a sequence of planets. That said, the results from this tool can be bad, especially for complicated gravity assists like this one. To get around that, I ran the tool 100 times or so to increase the odds of finding a good chain. And it did eventually deliver. It gave me this pretty good one here. Now, I'm not following its burns exactly. I'm mostly just using the times from the tool to plan out the gravity assists. For example, it said that we need to encounter our second Kerbin assist at year 3, day 136. So I set up the assist to encounter it at roughly this time. Speaking of second Kerbin assist, that's coming up now. At this point, the transfer stage is spent and is dead weight to us. To recover it, we're just going to dump it off as we fly by Kerbin. We just use a correction thruster to put it on track and then re-enter it. There's a wing panel on the bottom of this which helps slow it down and absorb the re-entry heat. This wing panel is the first part in the airstream again, and so protects the other components from excessive heating. Even then, you can see it gets pretty hot. Kerbal Engineer shows that we get up to 98.5% of our max heat tolerance, which is decently toasty. Through some dumb luck, the KSC is in the path of our descent. Perfect opportunity to land this closer to the Space Center. To save mass, we don't have any landing gear or parachutes, so we're just gonna land this in the water nearby. And with that, our transfer stage is safely home. Okay, let's get back to Jeb. With the second Kerbin assist done, we are approaching the most important gravity assist of this chain, Joule. This Joule assist is going to do two major things for us. For one, it's going to boost our apoapsis up to meet Eeloo, and secondly, it's going to match our inclination with Eeloo. You can see why timing this was so important here. As you can see, there's only really two places in Joule's orbit where it can do this well. Fortunately for us, the plan worked out as intended, and it's in the right place to give us this assist. So our final assist is done and our trajectory looks good. We are now on the way to the furthest destination in the Kerbal system. Just 2 more correction burns to get our flyby tuned. We can see the results of our efforts paying off big here. Our insertion burn is only about 400 meters per second. By contrast, if we did a direct transfer from Kerbin, this would be 1.4 kilometers per second, which is over 3 times higher. Overall, this whole chain only cost about 1.6 kilometers per second, including the correction burns. The direct transfer, on the other hand, would have been 3.5 kilometers per second, which is over 2 times higher. And there we are. After 4 long years of gravity assists, we have finally made it to Eeloo orbit. Okay, let's get this thing landed. Jeb, I know you're eager to get out of that chair and stretch your legs. First, let's detach the lander. The transfer stage will be left in orbit and the claw on board will be armed. We'll need that for later. For the landing, again, the fact we can't throttle or shut down SRBs is a problem. The challenge is we need to do the landing in one burn and come to a stop at the same time we run out of fuel. The first step to do this is to be in a low orbit. This will get us close to the ground when we start the burn and allow us to tune our landing better. I've chosen these mountains over here as our landing site since we will fly less than a kilometer overhead. Next problem is the delta V. We have more delta V than we need to land, so if we just burn retrograde, we'll end up burning too much and then flip around. To fine-tune the delta V, I'm going to oscillate the craft to waste delta V in other directions so we have just enough for the landing. The terrain is behaving a bit strangely, but we are safely down. Let's get out and plant our flag. Our transfer window is another 4 years out, so looks like we have some time to kill. Alright Jeb, you're dismissed. You've got this planet to yourself, go have some fun. Hello Jeb, welcome back. It's been fun to stay around, but our launch window is coming up and we should get going. Launch to orbit is more complicated than the landing. We have to rendezvous and dock with the stage we left in orbit, so we have to get everything timed right. We launch when the transfer craft is about 15 kilometers behind us. After lighting up the engines, we then try to cancel out as much relative velocity as possible. This first stage here gets us most of the way to orbit and gets us close to the target. Next, we have 2 Separotron stages to get our approach. These are slow burning stages so that we can carefully adjust our encounter. You can see that this first Separotron stage gets us an encounter within about 100 meters. So, we're on our final approach now. Let's do this. We're going to do the docking with just one stage. Now, that sounds incredibly difficult, if not impossible to pull off. But it's not as bad as it sounds. We can use a similar approach as what we did with the landing. We can light up the SRB, and then control our approach by oscillating and doing flips. By doing this, we can hopefully arrive at our target with a low enough velocity to dock. To make this whole thing easier, I set the thrust limiter to 0.5%, the lowest possible value. That way, we can have more time to react to changes and adjust our approach. And after that graceful series of maneuvers, we have docked. The difficult part of the mission is now behind us. Let's go home. We're gonna be using a gravity assist chain to get home again, but not the same route. We can just use a dual gravity assist this time, no need to do any Eve or Kerbin assists. Okay, I lied. Joule wasn't quite enough. We'll need to get some extra help from Payload to get the rest of the way. The re-entry will be about the same as for the transfer stage. We have a wing panel to protect Jeb and to help slow us down. This time though, I'm not relying on entirely dumb luck to get us close to the Space Center. This time, I've tuned the time of our re-entry with our final correction burn to actually put us on track for the Space Center. Now, I didn't do any calculations for this. I basically just set up an encounter blindly, saw how far it was off, and then moved the arrival time accordingly. So, my blind attempt put the craft 60 degrees east of the Space Center. This is 1/6 of a rotation of Kerbin. So, I moved the entry time 1/6 of a Kerbin day forward, or 1 hour forward. As you can see, this got us very close. We're right on target now. Which is good since this craft has the glide profile of a brick. Home at last. We've gone to Eeloo and back using only SRBs and recovered all parts from the mission in the process. I'd say this is a pretty good improvement over my last attempt, right? Thank you all for watching, and thank you all so much for 100,000 subscribers. This was an incredible journey for me. I've changed a lot as a person in these past 5 years, in addition to becoming a better KSP player. I'm very fortunate that this silly hobby of mine turned into this, so thank you for stopping by. Well, Jeb, I'm not gonna leave you in the ocean here. I called in an old friend to take you home. As for myself, I'll be heading out. See you all in the next one.